So Maid was looking to support market development with a focus on inclusive growth and improving climate resilience, three very large objectives. The Maid's program's methodology and approach also stand perhaps in some kind of contrast to sort of 50 years of handing out seeds and training farmers. So if this model is working, then we need to know how and why and to communicate that. And finally, before I hand over, this project seeds of our forthcoming new agricultural transformation program, the ATG. And so it's absolutely vital that the new ATG program, running for another 6 years, is going to get the benefit of what has been achieved in Maid and the lessons we've learned from it. So this session is an important part of that process. We're extremely grateful to our partners, represented here by the speakers who will be taking over shortly, led by Mark Thomas, Project Director. And so if I hand over to Nathan, our program implementers now, and they'll take us through the main lessons learned.
Thanks so much, Richard. Welcome everybody to this event. As Richard said, I'm Mark Thomas. I'm from Nathan Associates. This is the company contracted to deliver the Maid program. We're going to take you through a 7-year story of Maid. It's a good story with good outcomes. Didn't turn out necessarily the way it was envisioned at the start, but that was no surprise in a program of this type. And you'll see how we evolved and it made it work. I just want to mention that many people other than the three of us have played a key role on Maid over these many years. And I want to give a special mention to some FCDO people, the two Nanas as we knew them, Nana Frimpona and Nana Benyua, Nicholas Bainham, who also took over for a long spell in the middle and helped us a great deal. And I would like to mention also Augustine Adongo, who was our team leader for the first 4 years. And there are many others as well, of course. Now on this presentation, I'm joined by Jeff Norman, who is the current team leader and has been team leader for the last 3 years, and Camilla Studat, who's the program manager, and we're going to share the presentation between us. We're looking forward to getting your questions and comments, and we have some pauses in the presentation for questions, but also feel free to put any questions you have in the chat, and then we can pick them up in those gaps. So moving on to the next slide, please, Camilla. This is how we're going to tell the story. I was going to go through these 5 stages, if you like. The first 3, looking at actually what happened, and then we'll have a pause, and then we'll look at the lessons learned and looking forward. Moving on, Camilla, please. So I know many of you are from Ghana and you probably know this backwards, but for those who might not be, this was the situation that we faced at the beginning. The focus of the program was on northern Ghana, which was lagging behind many parts of the rest of the country in terms of agricultural development. Smallholder farmers dominate the north, and they're mainly subsistence farmers. By this, I don't mean that they never sell any produce, but for them, the primary focus is on growing food to eat and providing food for their family. Mostly they rely on the rains, and also, and importantly, their farming approach is essentially a combination of land and labor, with most things being carried out by hand. And they have obviously they have some access to seeds and inputs, but generally not of great quality. And at the risk of oversimplification, that the heavy reliance on labor means that you have very low labor productivity, and the poor quality of inputs means you have very low land productivity. So we're dealing with a real productivity challenge. Connections with organized marketing channels were weak, especially channels to the south. Marketing infrastructure, logistics services, information services are also very limited. And the public services provided to farmers in the north were also fairly poorly funded and, let's say, not necessarily well directed at the needs of those farmers in becoming commercial. So in a very brief summary, that's our starting point. Next slide, please, Camilla. So Maid was designed in recognition of this, but on the premise that the potential for transformation of the sector was there, both on the production side and on the evidence of demand for the products that could be delivered based on a smallholder production system. And further, that this whole transformation could be driven initially, at least, by the private sector. So Maid would work to find incentive-based solutions to change that interface between farmers and the market. Maid would not work with farmers directly or with non-commercial farmer-based organizations. This is not a program that was looking to work directly with production systems as a program. We're working through the businesses. So the approach, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, you're going to hear more about it, but it's built on using a market systems analysis as a framework for understanding the weaknesses and opportunities in the agricultural system. There's always a focus on changing the system and not applying a temporary fix to a few issues. There's a cyclical approach around the agricultural calendar, bringing the agribusinesses along a journey, learning each year as we went, next year improving, and so on. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to hand over to Jeff, and he's going to focus initially on the results of the program, and then we're going to explain how those results were achieved. So over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Mark. Well, given all those challenges, and they are significant, and given the fact that original business case somewhat overstated the capacity of the private sector to deliver the program outcomes, and probably underestimated the thinness of the market. The Maid program has achieved quite a lot, and the results are very impressive. I've just put some high-level results here on this slide. The program's worked with 114 agribusinesses, and they have contributed to improving productivity and resilience of around 139,000 smallholder farmers. These are direct beneficiaries, those that are targeted, and where we can actually monitor their progress and confirm that they have received inputs over the course of a year. 43% of those smallholder farmers are women. And if you look back at the business case, just to give you an idea of what has been achieved, we originally thought that we might be working with 20 agribusinesses, achieving 76,000 direct beneficiaries with 15% of women. Figures on the graph here include not only direct beneficiaries, but also indirect beneficiaries. A wider partner survey, which we conducted earlier this year, had found, in fact, that in addition to those targeted beneficiaries, there were approximately 1,000 smallholder farmers being reached by our current partners that weren't being recorded, and there was possibly another 30,000 or more smallholder farmers receiving Maid benefits through former partner firms. So if you take the total of another 60,000 on top, we're actually reaching more than 200,000 on this program. Another high-level result is the level of private sector investment, which by the beginning of this year, year 7, had reached just over 60 million pounds. Next slide. All of the log frame indicators had been achieved and exceeded through this program. I won't go through all of them. Let me just focus on a couple. Outcome indicator 2, which looks at the average income increase by smallholder farmers, has grown 9-fold over the life of the program, from a baseline of £128 per annum back in 2014 to over £1,000 at the end of year 6. We haven't got the year 7. That's a significant increase, most of it achieved as a result of improved yields and also increased land use. So the average plot size for smallholder farmers, part of the outgrower schemes supported by Maid, has increased from less than 1 acre back in 2015 to between 2 to 3 acres in year 6. The other highlight here is outcome indicator 4, which is the instances of progress towards systemic change. We've reported here 46 instances of change. There are possibly more. Difficult to actually define them, but they are largely aligned with working practice changes that are taking place. Business to farmer relationships have changed significantly since the outgrower schemes have been introduced. And also there are business to business changes. Commercial partnerships which have been introduced through the advanced program have also made a big difference. And again, that wider partner survey earlier this year suggests that it's not just progress towards systemic change, but actually these are true systemic changes that have taken place. Next slide, please. Difficult to know really how perceptions would change over a course of a program of this length. 7 years, so it's a good length of time to see. I would have anticipated that the enthusiasm of a new program early on, you'd have a fairly high figure and it would gradually decline over the course of the program. With Maid, it's done the complete opposite. We found that in recent years, the perception is extremely high. And there was a dip in year 2. I think this reflects what Mark was saying earlier about the fact that this is a program which has evolved. It's evolved significantly over the life of the program. And as we've got better at what we're doing, and as the private sector have appreciated more and more what's being involved in the advanced model, so perceptions have improved. And talking about the perceptions of partner firms, the next 3 slides are really looking at how effective that's been captured by the agribusiness partners that we've been working with. We've got now 78 partner profiles on the Maid website. These next 3 slides are just an example of those. There are 3 of them here. Antica joined the scheme back in 2014. Operates out of Wa in the Upper West region of Northern Ghana. Certified seed producer. Supplies a lot of companies with certified seed and also individual farmers, but had a very small outgrower base when they joined us. They've bought into the advanced model very effectively. Their outreach now is in excess of 4,000. They've seen big improvements in yield and big changes in terms of the aggregation levels, which means that they're now able to talk with buyers in the south with much more confidence about an ability to supply. Next slide. Naim Maltinga, one of the few companies that is female-owned that Maid has worked with. That's not because we have not wished to work with female. Quite the opposite. We would like to work with more, but there are very few agribusinesses owned by females in Northern Ghana. I think it's Melissa is the owner of this company. She's a very forceful lady and has done a huge amount actually to develop her business, and is one of the few businesses that's actually moved into further processing and into branding. Naim Matinga, just going back a little bit, I know I spent a bit of time on it, but Naim Matinga is one of the companies that actually has worked with us on trying to test the efficacy of aflasafe to reduce aflatoxin in groundnuts. Regio Agritrade, the 3rd of the companies on this list. I think the FCDO Ghana team visited this company when they were up in Tamale. It's a Tamale-based organization, works in the northern region, but has extensive operations beyond that. It very enthusiastically bought into the advanced model. It has its own commercial farms, but it wished to increase the amount of volume of production and has now got into outreach programs. It's extended its outreach to over 3,000 smallholder farmers in 2019. A lot of improvement in terms of yields, and has definitely bought into the Farm Enterprise Advisory Scheme, which has allowed it to feel confident that it can actually run these outgrower schemes now. The figure to look at here is the acreage of land that they own that are now used by outgrowers. It's exceeded now 6,500 acres. Next slide. Over to you, Camilla.
Thank you. So how was this success achieved? The key was the ability and empowerment of the management team to shift effectively and quickly when needed. We were able to change our approach and types of interventions. This enabled us to really build momentum. Maid shifted away from value chain to enterprise development. And this wasn't done for ideological reasons, but because of what the industry was eager to receive. There was no blueprint when we signed a contract with FCDO all those years ago, laying out this 3-phase program we can now easily package for you in this presentation. Along with FCDO, we discovered quite a lot in this journey together. And because of that, we can now present you these 4 distinct areas of focus and success for Maid, which we have deemed as Maid's critical pathways. However, all of these came about from a really reiteratively learning and evolving alongside with the agribusinesses we supported to respond to their changing needs and priorities. So now back to you, Jeff.
Okay, there's a lot on this slide, and I have a very limited amount of time to actually deliver it. So I'm going to go quickly into it. We've spoken a lot in the results about the advanced model. It is not a blueprint. It's something which has been evolving over the life of the program and will continue to evolve. It's essentially about getting affordable inputs and services to smallholder farmers. And it's encapsulated in the idea in the 7 rights to smallholder farmers. It's something which we put out as a statement of intent to agribusinesses that if they were going to run outgrower schemes, they should try to ensure that their smallholder farmers had access to the right quality and quantity of inputs and services, delivered at the right time, at the right price, in the right place, in the right form, and that it should be supported to be used effectively. And that principle around the 7 rights has really driven the advancement of that advanced model. It's moved from basic bundles in years 1 and 2, delivering a small range of services and input supplies. And most of the agribusiness partners by year 6 were actually delivering against the premium bundle. And the premium bundle, of course, it's all very well having a model and deciding what one wants to deliver, but in fact you have to plan effectively that, and you have to deliver it effectively. And the planning, what we have done, which I think is unique to the Maid program, is that we have introduced business planning, cost modeling, and crop forecasting into the partner selection process. So no partner that actually enters into the Maid program can do so without having going through year-on-year annual cycles of business planning. And that unique feature, which is very commercially focused, I think is part of the reason why this has been embraced so effectively by the agribusinesses and why the perceptions of the program is so high. So the delivery of that has really combined 2 aspects, one of which is we forced really through the program, which is the farm advisory services. You know, many of these smallholder farmers only operating on a single or 2 acres, it takes a lot of those farmers to actually make business. And some of the agribusinesses that we work with have now got 5,000 smallholder farmers in their outreach programs. To actually hold that in place is very difficult. It needs a good service on the ground, making sure that all these supplies and services are delivered effectively. And so we put a lot of effort into that farm advisory service, and we've offered training for farm advisory services. 375 FEAs, farm enterprise advisors, have been taken on board and recruited by our agribusiness partners over the last 3 years, which is a significant number. And also to deliver effectively against those bundles, many of the companies had to actually introduce commercial partnerships, support enterprises to help them to deliver, particularly some of the more specialist services like mechanization services, irrigation, etc. And in fact, the commercial partnerships is, again, an area that's expanding rapidly. Next slide. So the main elements of that advanced model, which is making sure that there is effective inclusion of all farmers into outgrower schemes, not just those that have rights, but smallholder farmers, female farmers that are most effective at delivering and taking on new ideas. Farm enterprise advisors who actually deliver the program and make sure that new technologies are being adapted and adopted effectively. Commercial partnerships. All of those three we felt we needed to actually look at in more detail. We got some independent assessments undertaken of those, and we asked the independent assessors to look at whether or not we had made the business case for them, and all three of those have come back extremely positive. Again, I would ask you to actually go onto the website and have a look at these business case studies, because I think they are very informative. We've also run a couple of what we call case for studies. We wanted to include within the advanced model elements of climate adaptability. We were partially successful. We've introduced certainly drought tolerant seeds into the program. But we've been less successful with changing the land management practices. Ploughing is still largely used in northern Ghana, even though the soils are very fragile and the fertility is extremely low. And there's a water retention with ploughed land. The case for conservation farming, I think, has been made, but we're a long way yet from actually implementing it effectively within northern Ghana. And one that we haven't included on that list, which has been completed fairly recently, which is the case for branding and traceability. There is still no traceability requirements for much of the groundnuts and sorghum, and maize, which are sold within Ghana and which possibly have high levels of aflatoxin. So the second key element that we were talking about, which we consider to be a critical pathway, has been enhancing management awareness, skills and tools. Agribusinesses generally are quite small. Even with a large smallholder outreach, they're still actually producing very small levels of produce, and so turnover is quite low. They haven't got the capacity to introduce professional management into their structures. And so we spent quite a bit of time on the program trying to build that capacity. Part of that was to introduce networking platforms, and we did that again through those business planning sessions that we held. We had a series of workshops, or we hold a series of workshops annually in each of the regions, and we invite to those workshops input suppliers, mechanization companies, companies such as the Ghana Commodity Exchange to actually talk about warehousing, just to build a network of market actors so that they can operate together. And it's been very effective, and it's certainly driven the commercial partnerships program. We've also recognized that there is a need to move much further in terms of effective performance monitoring. again, as you expand your outreach, you need to be able to monitor that very effectively. And the mechanisms for doing that are not very sophisticated. Mostly paper-based records, which are taken back and fed into Excel spreadsheets back in the head office. We've introduced a number of new platforms for that, new apps, and they are likely to be commissioned at the beginning of next year and hopefully rolled out to most of the agribusiness partners. We've also noted that there is a long way to go in terms of strategic thinking within the agribusinesses. Most agribusinesses work on a year-to-year basis. Very few have strategic plans, forward plans. We undertook a benchmarking exercise in year 6, compared the agribusinesses in the north with those in the south. It wasn't a terribly sensitive process. We didn't really get the sort of the distinction between the business levels very effectively identified. But we've taken that forward, introduced roadmaps. 10 roadmaps were undertaken at the beginning of this year. 10 firms introduced roadmaps. And that's, again, something which needs to be taken forward in future programs. Big issue here on tractor brokerage and mechanization services. One of the big problems with getting everything started at the beginning of the year effectively is the lack of tractors. There's a very small window of opportunity to actually prepare land, particularly if you don't use minimum tillage and zero tillage. And to be honest, that has been an issue for many years in northern Ghana. It's not called the tractor graveyard of West Africa for no reason at all. Been a major problem. Tractor brokerage has helped bringing up tractors from the south and the central regions, but the service provided was fairly poor. And many of our agribusinesses now are actually moving into producing or having their own mechanization services. But it's, again, something which needs to develop even further. And finally, the use of model farms and demonstration plots. This has been really well captured. We had 10 irrigation pilots commissioned, pilot plots commissioned at the end of year 6. And this has introduced a lot of interest within the other agribusinesses. These are being used now for demonstration purposes. And again, it's an area that there's a tremendous opportunity for advancement in future years. Next slide. So the third area, the third of these main critical pathways has been to make the wider case for private sector-led development in northern Ghana, in fact in Ghana in general. We were criticised quite heavily at the end of the first phase of the programme of not really exposing the successes of the programme very effectively. And so we've put a lot of effort into that over the last 2 years. Just to give you an idea, we've got 12 snapshots in our resource centre on the website. We've got 8 success stories, 6 investment opportunity profiles, 5 annual reports, and 1 still outstanding, which is the end of programme report. We've got 4 business cases represented there, and we've got 4 market diagnostic reports, 8 case studies, and a whole load of other things. And again, I would advise anybody that's interested in this program to go onto the website and actually take a look through that resource center. Also on there, of course, is the partner profiles, and we've got 78 of those. So I know I've taken up too much time, so I'm now going to hand over to Camilla.
Don't worry, Jeff. So the last of the pathways is challenging gender stereotypes, and we added here also mobilizing youth, because as part of the phase 3, this is something we also began to look at in more detail. Maid heavily invested its equity efforts on increasing women's participation at the smallholder level with considerable success. The initial business plan, as Jeff mentioned earlier on, set a target of 15% for female smallholder farmers, which we quickly increased to 45% for phase 2 and onwards to accompany our business's drive to engage more with female farmers. Agribusinesses saw a real business opportunity to gain from working with female smallholder farmers. Not only were women an untapped client base for them, but also when they started working with women, they noticed that they just were better at repaying, and their rates were better. They were more loyal customers, and they're also better at adopting good agricultural practices. Through our constant learning in phase 2, the team identified a gap in women working in higher levels of the agricultural sector within our program. As we've mentioned earlier, we didn't have a lot of female-owned businesses that worked with us. In fact, in year 6, less than 4 businesses we engaged with, and around 13% of our FEAs were women. We decided to embark on this assessment that Jeff mentioned to better understand the barriers for women in agriculture, especially regarding entering the private sector. We quickly discovered that this was not only an issue for Maid. It was seen across agricultural sector as a whole, from government to other donor-funded programs in Ghana. The number of women is drastically lower the higher you look. Amongst many findings of our assessment, we identified a real opportunity for young women to work with our agribusinesses, not only to increase their exposure to the private sector, but also to break some existing social barriers to hiring them in the first place. Through this, Maid internship scheme was born. But then COVID-19 happened. Maid was one of the first programs in Ghana, especially in the agricultural sector, to put forward a contingency plan and pivot our interventions to respond to the economic and health impacts of coronavirus. In April, we had our response plan in place for all of our interventions, including the Maid internship scheme. We adjusted the focus of the scheme as well as the curriculum for the interns to respond to the farmers and the agribusinesses needs at the time. Over 300 recent graduates from 5 agricultural colleges in Ghana applied. Unfortunately, less than 15% of applicants were women. We selected 15 men and 15 women to participate in the scheme and placed them with selected agribusinesses. I could spend hours telling you about this pilot, trust me. However, I think it's best for you to hear from one of our agribusinesses about his experience hosting an intern as part of the scheme. An interesting thing about the video that I'm about to show you is that we didn't actually prompt the partner to record any of these videos. He simply recorded them and shared it on his social media. We thought they were brilliant at capturing the story and asked him if he could repackage, or actually if he could send it to us so we could repackage it and share it with a wider audience.
We're not getting the sound, Camilla.
Oh, let me try again then. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, let me start again.
Of smallholder farm.
Is it working now?
Yes. Yes.
Savannah AgriChains is a producer organization which is into the support of smallholder farmers to go into the production of agricultural crops like maize, groundnut, sorghum, and rice. We support not less than 2,000 smallholder farmers every cropping season. We are in partnership with the Market Development Program for Northern Ghana since 2018. I want to share briefly with you the impact of the Maid Graduate Internship Program in the life of the smallholder farmer, the intent, and the agribusiness.
Sukulu biene tu so ba bara njawe kulkune tutun lele jawe kulkune tu COVID-19 ku apesere ma wurta yesere ta sane jamre da ta jangala gala da ta kwal mama da bara ta bara ba wure yesere bara wentinte.
My name is Awedu Angela, intern from Savannah AgriChains Limited. I just want to say something little about my internship. As an intern, I work directly with the smallholder farmers in their various communities with a supervisor. During my 1-month period, I was able to reach out to over 500 smallholder farmers in 20 communities with a message of COVID-19 and good agricultural practices for healthy farming and better production, which will enhance food security in our rural communities. During my internship program, I've learned and gained more experience, and I'm very grateful to the Maid internship program team and their organizers for organizing such a wonderful program. Thank you.
These interns have been very useful to our individual agribusinesses, taking into consideration their educational background and their field of study. They are well vested in all the agronomics when it comes to agriculture. These are the values that they have impacted in our smallholder farmers. We are forever grateful for such an intervention.
When the internship scheme was first designed, we had mixed feelings about how successful it could be in a year and how many interns could realistically secure jobs as part of the scheme. I mean, just ask Nicholas, he's on the call. When it was first launched as a COVID-19 response, we were even more apprehensive about the potential of leading to real opportunities that are sustainable beyond Maid's interventions and investment. The pilot actually was extremely successful, and as you can see in the numbers here, it really shows that there's a real appetite from the private sector to engage youth, especially women, even in the agricultural sector of northern Ghana. So before we move on, we're going to open up for questions. I know that Kasha has been looking through any comments left. Kasha, are there any comments at this point or questions?
No one has left any questions so far, but the floor is open if anyone. Okay, it seems like there are some questions from the audience. Please go ahead, Muhammad.
Hello, good afternoon. Hello.
Hello, we can hear you. Hi.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Let me start by saying that I have no doubt that Maid has had some achievements and people's lives have been changed. I have no doubts about that. But I just want to seek some few clarifications. Listening to one of the presenters, he did the usual definition of a subsistence farmer. And the understanding behind it was that he had no connection with the market. And I just want to place you to the reality on the ground, because every subsistence farmer, so-called, when cultivating, has it at the back of his or her mind that he will sell some of the produce to meet some of his or her needs. This ranges from healthcare to education of children, and then to be able to buy things that he or she doesn't produce. And so if the subsistence farmer is divorced from the market, I tend to have difficulty in actually looking at the reality on the ground and our understanding of who the subsistence farmer is. That is one. I'm happy to also hear that about 60.7 million pounds, am I right, what has been injected into the program? Am I right? I saw something like that. 60.7 million.
That's the amount of money injected by the businesses.
By the businesses. Because I wanted, because I like your idea of smallholder rights. So I just wanted to know the share of the farmer the farmer on the ground his or her share of this amount as compared to the other actors along the value chain? I'm asking this because of your idea of farmer or smallholder farmer rights, which I so much like. So I would have wished to know how the smallholder farmer has benefited from this, especially that when you were showing your achievements, all those actors you showed were beyond the farmer, were other actors along the value chain. So that is what actually brought this to my mind. And I would want to know what share they got from this money coming out of the investors. So I'll just leave this and seek for clarification, maybe.
Okay, so I'll take that one, Mohammed. Thanks for your question. Maybe I didn't explain it clearly, but I said that the situation at the beginning was what I call primarily subsistence, and I did say that that didn't mean that farmers didn't sell anything. It's clear farmers always try to sell something, as you say. The point was that they're primarily looking after their own needs and not primarily focused on being a commercial farmer. The whole model of Maid is not about giving resources to anybody. We were making some small grants to the agribusinesses to help with the cost of operating their FEAs, their advisors. And they themselves made the investments in their businesses. The benefits flow down to the farmers through the fact that they are able to get better inputs, get the whole bundle, including the tractor services, to fairly dramatically increase their yields and incomes that way. So it wasn't a program that handed out to farmers or anybody else.
Okay.
So there's a question there from
So I'm just seeing there, we've got another question from Christina. Yeah, I'll leave it to you guys.
Jeff, I'm going to hand this question to you. This is a question about the dip in year 2 in perception.
Yep.
Could you tell us a bit more about the dip and what you did to overcome it, please? Could this perhaps be aligned to your increased comms activities in the later years?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that. I must confess I wasn't involved in the Maid program at that time, but I suspect that even if I was involved at that time, there would be a dip. We spent the first year mostly on scoping. We were scoping the opportunities for improving the supply of inputs and services to smallholder farmers. We were looking specifically at value chains. And the number of agribusinesses that we were working with was extremely small. I think we only had 4 in year 2. So therefore, as I mentioned in the slide, there was a progressive change in the amount of information we had available, and there was a progressive change over the life of the program in what we were able to offer to agribusinesses in order to improve their ability to deliver against the 7 rights. And I think the perception changes occurred when they started to get a return on that investment. So they invested a lot, and I've noticed this throughout the whole of the program, that we've asked our agribusiness partners to invest a lot of their time in collecting information and providing us data and reporting the success of programs. And I think when you do that without getting a sensible return, your perception of the program is fairly low. And I think that's what happened initially. Subsequently, with big improvements in return on investment, I think we got an increase in that perception.
Okay, we have a question from Richard about, can we describe how the overall agricultural market changed as a result of Maid? So that's a tough one, which is probably why he asked it. And I think the answer to that is that we can't be sure how far we've reached in terms of the overall market. I think we've clearly changed the way it's operating for our agribusinesses, and to some extent that seems to have influenced the volumes flowing out of the north to the south, the kind of relationships that are beginning to develop. But of course, there are many, many more farmers in the north of Ghana who have not been directly or indirectly included in the program. I think the key point is that this model is going to stay, and it's going to spread, and it's the beginning of a shift, I think.
Can I add to that, Mark? Just really to say that the GCX has obviously recognized that there is a lot more material, potentially a lot more marketable commodity available from the north, and is starting to introduce and build warehouses in the north, and is certainly taking over responsibility for warehousing production in the north that can be then sent south. So the big change in that. There's also a lot more of the leading firms getting involved in setting up their own operations in the north. So 2 of the leading input suppliers are now establishing offices in the north. We've had John Deere establishing an office in Tamale for tractors to go into the north, in the northern region, and to maintain them. So there's evidence that the market is responding to this increased production that's now available.
So Chris has asked about efforts we had to work with farmer-based organizations. So that's an interesting question, Chris, because there are a lot of efforts in the north before we started to build farmer-based organizations. As I'm sure you know, it's a fairly standard approach for many programs supporting farmers, that they feel that they need to support the farmers to organize themselves, either to process or to sell produce themselves and so on. We were not focused on that at all directly, but what we did see that as the businesses develop their outreach and develop the scale of their operations, increasingly the FEAs, as we call them, the Farmer Enterprise Advisors, began to engage with farmer-based organizations, some that were already there, coming out of some of these other programs, and sometimes actually working through lead farmers and getting farmers to organize themselves. So this was partly a response to the existence of some of these organizations on the ground, but partly it was just a response of the businesses to better organize their farmers as they expanded and outreached more people. So, I mean, from our point of view, the key is that we as Maid didn't go in and say, you've got to organize farmer-based organizations. We said, this is your business. Your business is going to do well if you can supply this bundle to your growers. And they worked out the best way to do it.
Yes, and actually,
still working out the best way to do it.
Sorry, just to add, especially for the agribusinesses that wanted to have larger numbers of female farmers, beneficiaries, they are the ones that are most likely to form a group. And the agribusinesses themselves were very helpful to the smallholder farmer, the female smallholder farmers, to help them organize their groups as well.
Yeah, just following on to what Mark was saying, we've actually in this year, in year 7, for the first time, we've introduced business farmer training or farm business training opportunities for what we call cluster group leaders. We had I can't remember the actual number now, but I know it represented 7,000 smallholder farmers, and most of which were part of farmer business organizations. So we're seeing that trend happening all the time, but as Mark said, we're not pressing it, but where it appears, we're certainly supporting it. So
right, I think we should jump on, Camilla, to the next bit.
Yes.
Okay, thanks for the questions, everybody. So we just have 3 more slides for you here, which is really looking at lessons and insights. The first one is going to focus on sort of immediate lessons from Maid and in Northern Ghana. And then we're going to have a look at a bit at what comes next, what's needed next. And then finally, we're going to have a look at the sort of wider lessons for beyond Northern Ghana and maybe beyond Ghana altogether. So turning our attention to this slide, I mean, I think I'm going to focus on 2 really key lessons. First of all, the advanced business model showed us something that actually maybe is pretty obvious. You need to fix more than one thing at the same time. It's no good just providing seed or fertilizer and expecting everything to change. You have to look more systemically, and you have to look a bit broader. The thing is that the businesses saw this, and they gradually saw the importance of the bundles and developing the bundles. It's not something we forced on them. It's something they realized, and we worked together with them to see how they could do it. So in developing those bundles and putting everything together so the farmers had all their rights, everything at the right time in the right place, etc., they soon realized they needed the farm enterprise advisors. And the farm enterprise advisors became, essential to their model to make it all work. They helped to organize the farmers, it reduced their risk, it gave the farmers advice to keep on top of the use of inputs and services. One of the problems we had earlier on was farmers wouldn't use the inputs in the right way at the right time. And then it was harder, of course, for the businesses to get repaid in terms of the crops, because the yields were too low. Then they began to see how these FEAs, who initially they recruited mostly sort of locally and from the communities, they began to see that if they were more professional and better trained, they'd work even better. So they began to buy into the whole upskilling, and eventually they bought into, hiring professionally trained people through the internships. And as I said just now, within all of this, you began to get better organization of farmers through small-scale farmer organizations, all within this response to the need to provide the bundling. And finally, as Jeff mentioned, what comes out of this is then they can't provide everything they need to the bundle on their own, so they look for commercial partners to help them. And the whole commercial enterprise, business-to-business relationships came out of that. I think the other thing I really want to stress is that most of the agribusinesses we work with now have shown their ability and willingness to continue to use this approach, whether Maid is there or not. Some of them will go on, no doubt, to develop it further. Others will stick with what they know, but it's made as significant. It's not something that disappears with us. And we also feel that it's been quite resilient, as demonstrated by COVID. The fact that they had these systems in place, they wanted to go on delivering the bundles, nearly all of them, they were hit by COVID, they had delays getting things, but they basically sustained the business. So that's one really important thing I think that's come out of this initiative in Northern Ghana. Turning to inclusion, the other lesson there is that, by focusing on the potential of women to play a greater role as customers of the agribusinesses, Maid was able to really make great strides in increasing the partition of women in commercial production. The businesses found they were good partners, as Camilla said. They sought to facilitate their engagement further. They started hiring more female FEAs when they could. And many women were able to get hold of additional land to expand their production. And of course, you can only really expand easily if you have mechanized services. Of course, there's a long way to go. The sector is still, heavily dominated by men, and the whole labour market is still very much dominated by men. But we were pretty pleased with the progress that made on that inclusion. On the next slide, I think it's important to look forward. We have a vision for what a transformed agricultural sector would look like in Ghana. And we've been focusing very much on one part of it, but a very important part of it, that frontline relationship between agribusinesses as input providers and off-takers and the farmers. And we think we've come a very long way in seeing how that can be improved to move us towards better productivity. But there's still more work to do with the agribusinesses. It's not like the model's done and dusted and we just got to roll it out. It's still evolving. Some firms are way behind, some firms are way ahead. And of course, there are all the linkages along that with other agribusinesses, with the big input suppliers in Ghana and with the big off-takers and end users of products. I think, the financial system as a whole is also a system that doesn't work well in the north. These organizations are providing credit effectively to their growers by giving them the inputs, and they themselves have to find working capital. But even going beyond working capital, this is an undercapitalized part of Ghana, and investment is essential. So that whole system of investment getting into the north is going to be a big part of the transformation going forward. As Jeff said, the actual market is very unsophisticated. There's very little product differentiation. There's very little incentive to produce quality. Aflatoxin, we tried with Aflasafe. It's a great product, but it costs money. Why would a farmer use Aflasafe unless they get a premium for their product as a result? The systems to support research and innovation are quite weak in the north. This is perhaps particularly important in the context of climate change, as mentioned by Richard and by Jeff. There are plenty of technologies out there that can be adapted for the north, but the incentives to invest in them now are kind of limited. We had a look at conservation farming and minimum tillage, which from our point of view, the north is really crying out for, but it's going to take quite a long time and quite a lot of effort and quite a lot of demonstration. But nevertheless, I do feel that in the end, the agribusinesses can play a big role in transforming that approach to cultivation to make it more climate smart. And then to have this sort of dynamic sector that we need, obviously, you need to use all the talent available, and you need to bring more women and youth into the whole system, into the labor market, and make it work better. The whole system of training and capacity building is very sort of kind of old-fashioned. It's geared up to producing extension officers for the Ministry of Agriculture, to be honest, and it has very little private sector content, and that's an important area, another part of the system. So there's plenty to do to achieve that kind of dynamic agricultural transformation that we want. But we think the potential is huge, is clear. Even, with one program, one fairly small program, I think we've gone a long way to beginning to shift the needle, and there's plenty more that can be achieved. Last slide, please. So finally, a few reflections on what can Maid offer to the wider development community in agriculture. First of all, I don't want to spend a lot of time on lessons that have been learned many times before, but nevertheless, it is worth mentioning that some of these lessons were very important for Maid. So I've just mentioned them: the need for flexibility, the need for time, the need for adaptive management and being allowed to change course and do what needs to be done, and the need to iteratively learn each season. These are important, and many other programs have learned those lessons. I guess the next is a really important question, is that the private sector really can deliver development benefits. We often talk about harnessing the power of the private sector, aligning incentives. And I think we demonstrated with Maid that it really can deliver. Of course, it's important to tailor your approach to the private sector you have in front of you. And it took us a while to get that right, to understand where the businesses were. But once we got that and we pitched it right for them, they've really delivered for us. Next, I think it's really important to understand the system and work out where you're going to intervene and what you're going to tackle. And this also takes a while. It's complex. An important thing you can take away more generally is I don't think it's necessarily the best thing to tackle the easiest thing. Tougher things can be more important and have more impact. And I think many programs using a kind of market systems approach have tended to go for the easiest bits of the market to fix, which is often the seeds and the fertilizers and the inputs, and much less often the mechanization and the investment and the finance and research and so on. So I think that's an important thing. If you're going to try and fix part of the system, don't necessarily fix the easiest bit. Some interesting issues I think come up about achieving scale and value for money. In agriculture, you know, in M4P particularly, or market systems approaches as they are now, there has been a lot of programs that have looked very broadly and look to achieve systemic change through facilitation and policy reform without direct interventions. Now, if you can pull that off and it really is a sustainable systemic change, you'll get a lot of benefits, but it's often very difficult to do and hard to attribute. On the other end of the spectrum, you have programs that now focus on direct investment into a few businesses. This, of course, will give you some very direct benefits if those businesses work with outgrowers or employ large numbers of people. But it has very little systemic impact, and your scale will be very limited by that. I think it's really a lesson from Maid that we reach 200,000 farmers with an approach that lies somewhere in between. We have supported over 100 agribusinesses along the way, but not with big investments, actually with pretty small grants combined with some active engagement. These businesses have mixed performance, but the business model has changed, and they're mostly on a journey, and a journey that does support transformation of the sector. So the scale is important, and I think there's some lessons to learn about how we achieve that scale. And then from my point of view, the final point of all of this is that market systems approaches are still relevant. Markets define economic activity, and whatever interventions we make, we are wise to think about their impact on the market system. And using market systems analysis and understanding what is working, what is not working, does enable us to focus better on what we want to achieve, without making any comments about how we then do it. So I'm going to stop there, and I see we have some more questions coming in.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Shall I summarise these as you've only just got off the mic? So Alorm is asking, did Maid influence any of the prices, either of those that smallholder farmers had to pay for their inputs, or perhaps how much they were selling to aggregators? That's one question. And then Colin's asking around issues of land ownership. Did it come in to the project? Did it cause any problems? And then finally, how did we manage the motivation for the farmer enterprise agents? Cost share with businesses, or perhaps it was entirely the businesses operating on a commercial basis. I don't know. Over to you guys.
So, Jeff, would you like to explain about the cost issues within? So the question was, did Maid influence the costs smallholder farmers had to accommodate? I think the basic answer is no.
Well, the basic answer is we don't know, I think. We have not really analysed that aspect of the programme. As I say, we've introduced business planning at the beginning of the year, and we take all of the agribusinesses through the cost modeling. So, and it's done on the basis of each commodity. So what we've got is a fairly good understanding of what the costs and the investments are for the agribusinesses, but it's not broken down specifically into inputs. So I'd say, no, we don't have that information.
And it was part of the principles of the project, right, that you wouldn't interfere in subsidizing prices, right?
No,
just to increase access.
I mean, absolutely not. We were not engaged in that part of it at all. So there were quite a number of models between businesses and the farmers as to the basis for their credit and receipt. Mostly it was based on repayment in the form of crop, with the aggregator agreeing a price. The current market price was used to settle that, and additional sales to the aggregator were based on current market prices. But we didn't say what that should be or what it shouldn't be. And similarly around land ownership, that was outsourced as well, if you like, to the businesses. The businesses wanted to work with the farmers. I think I'm correct in saying there are many more farmers who want to join in now with these outgrow schemes than the businesses can accommodate. So the businesses have their criteria for deciding who can join and who can't. And I'm not sure that how they deal with land disputes, whatever, but they're basically, I imagine, want to be sure that the farmers they work with have access to land.
I mean, just to add to that, every program has a scope, and as Mark has mentioned, we can't do everything. We had our scope, we didn't have land ownership and land dispute within our scope, but there are a lot of other programs in Northern Ghana that do work with this, and we're aware of them. And there's a lot of programs, especially in regards to women accessing land. I believe I'm not going to say because we're being recorded, so I don't want to misquote which program it is. But there are programs operating in Northern Ghana around land dispute, land ownerships, working in different ways. Our agribusinesses also work with land in different ways. Some agribusinesses themselves have massive lands that they lease out to different farmers. So for instance, one of the businesses we showcased here, Rujo, he has a lot of land and he's able to have a lot of female farmers because he leases the land directly to them. So there's less issues there. But every business had their own models of working. Some worked with the villages to empower the husbands to give land to their wives. So we didn't get into this. This is something very important, but it wasn't in our scope.
Although don't underestimate the impact of your model, right? So yes. The very fact that you were doing a smallholder farmer approach and working with agribusinesses that were learning to sell to poorer and greater numbers of people, and then to aggregate from poorer and greater numbers of people, effectively was an approach to land ownership. It was a way of solving all of these other market problems without getting involved in having to change land ownership, which actually is a fairly smart way of getting around the land ownership problem.
Which is a very big one.
If I could just add to that, the government's program, the Planting for Food and Jobs program, registration for that to receive input supplies is dependent upon land tenure ownership. And so, in fact, in the early years, I don't know, I think it actually has changed, but in the early years, they were only actually supplying through that program a very, very small percentage of female farmers. Mm-hmm. Whereas our program, as we've shown in all the results, have been achieving very high levels of female farmers joining the schemes. And this year, exceptionally this year, all the new farmers coming in, 55% of all new farmers this year are female. So yes, we don't have that issue with access to land for female farmers. They may not own the land, but they have access to it.
And of course, the agribusinesses are finding a way to lend to farmers that doesn't require any land collateral or anything like that, which is good. The last question there about motivation for the farm, the FEAs. So what we did as Maid is support the agribusinesses with the cost of mobilizing them, the cost of moving them around the countryside and so on, and training, but not with the salaries. And the salaries were up to the agribusiness, how they did that. Some of them paid a base salary and had a sort of commission element to it if their farmers performed well and delivered a good volume of crops for them. But again, that was up to them to work out that model. So we did a bit of support on running their motorbikes or that sort of thing to make sure that they got around. And this is this is how the model was evolving, because you're asking businesses to try something different each year that they haven't tried before. They're not sure if it's going to work. You're trying to buy down the risk a bit by just giving a little bit of support.
And just to say, there's a business case on the FEAs which outlines the different cost models and how different businesses adapted this model as part of their business operations. And it's really interesting to read. If you have some time, I would really motivate you to look at it, because it shows how we didn't invent the FEA model to whatever way. So which is why it makes it sustainable in the long term without Maid's investment. Yeah,
one of the ways that they're actually meeting the costs of FEAs was shown in one of the companies up in Upper East. We helped them establish an irrigation plot, 1 acre irrigation plot, which was producing small seedlings for vegetable production. And that company paid its FEAs in giving them access to those seeds during the off season. So it couldn't meet all the costs during the year. It paid a commission during the year on the number of smallholder farmers that they were working with. And then in the off season, it's giving them the opportunity to work some additional land during the off season. So there's a whole host of different ways that companies have approached meeting the cost of the FEAs. I should also state that the FEA cost as a percentage of total production cost is less than 15%. I mean, I know that sounds actually quite high, and it is, but they do a huge amount. And if you double the yields as a result of having them, you can quickly recover that. And that's what the business case was intended to do, which was to show to agribusinesses that there was a true return on investment by hiring them. We incidentally met about, I think it was less than 5% of the total.
Less than 5%, yes. Yeah. So we Maid's contribution was less than 5% of the business annual costs. Do we have any additional questions that weren't captured in the comments? You can raise your hand or just. With land input prices and FEA costs, the lesson is step lightly on the market and allow new commercial business models to emerge. Thanks for that comment, Richard.
Here's a big question. How much difference did you really make on climate vulnerability? You can claim tens of thousands of farmers, I think, would tick a box that said they'd changed their practices to something that we could define as being climate smart, right? Really, was it big sets of differences or just ticking a box?
Shall I answer that? We didn't make a huge impact in terms of the program. The introduction of the drought-resistant seed at the beginning was considered to be an effective way of building resilience. But there was a study carried out at the end of year 6 by CCAFs, looking at, I think this was a commissioned report by FCDO at the time, or DFID FCDO. And what they have demonstrated is that the Maid program has significantly success improving the yields, we have made an impact on them. But in fact, what they've stated that we could double the impact simply by encouraging 50% of the agribusinesses to move into conservation. So, but at least we've made some impact. And many of those commissioned model farms are now demonstrating conservation farming to their smallholder farmers. And there is an uptake. There was an increased uptake in year 6. We don't know what the uptake has been in year 7, but this progress is being made, but it's fairly slow.
I mean, I think
I think
that
over to you, Mark.
I was just going to add that I think that to really make the shift, smart agriculture is going to take more than just what you put there about, you know, step lightly on the market. It's going to take a push, because there you are talking about a technology that's not familiar to people at all, something completely new, and that's going to take a push.
It takes a push, but the interesting thing is that if I'm a farmer and I look across at my neighboring farmer's field and I see that their maize stalks are twice as high as my maize stalks, I actually ask them why. And this is what's happening in terms of conservation farming. It's a slow progression, but it's gradually taking hold, I think.
Yeah, I think it's very likely that in terms of climate adjustments, the market's going to need more of a push than simply discovering new ways of doing business or discovering new ways of making money. Discovering new ways of reducing emissions are not necessarily going to take off in quite the same way. So I think that's a very fair distinction, Mark. Nina's come in with what I suspect will be the final question with 5 minutes to go, asking about the impact on incomes on smallholder farmers, and then interesting about assets, which is linking back into vulnerability and resilience again, I think.
So one of the things that we haven't really been able to do is to follow through on the more effects of the extra income done, where it was invested, whether it was invested in, you know, kids' school fees, or whether it was invested in improving the household, or whether outside
There's some
income.
anecdotal evidence through our case study, sorry to interrupt, Mark, that especially the women are reinvesting in the children's schooling and on more nutritious foods for household consumption. But it's all anecdotal. We didn't look at the household level. That was a gap within Maid, but it wasn't part of our scope. But I believe ATG scope has household levels dynamics that would be considered. Sorry, back to you, Mark.
So, I mean, we have the evidence of the increase in income, but as to how that flowed through, as Camilla said, we don't really. Climate change, we touched upon. There's another question from Francis. The recovery rate from smallholders to, you know, to the businesses is pretty high. I don't know the actual number, but it's very high.
Anecdotally, it varies between 70 to 100%. Women tend to be on the higher recovery bracket, which is actually one of the reasons why the businesses prefer to work with women, because they have better recovery and better repayment rates.
Again, anecdotally, since we've introduced the FEA, or since agribusinesses have introduced FEAs, that recovery has been substantially higher.
Yes, and we capture that in, I believe, all of our business cases. So from the gender assessment, where we really look at the gender dynamics of the repayments, but also in the FEAs on how the FEA model did increase and improve the recovery rates, and the business a lot more trust client base, which are the farm. So if you have some time, again, definitely do look at those business cases. I think Lucy sent a final question. What was Maid's main failure or incorrect assumption during design? And finally, its biggest success? And I'll leave it to Mark, who's been here since the design.
I've got Nana B there to help me. I would say that the biggest failure, or maybe more incorrect assumption during design, was probably the pace at which we were going to be able to change things. The idea was that many big businesses in the south were going to immediately come into the north and basically partner with the local companies, and that's how we'd move. In fact, it was very hard to get those linkages established, and the businesses in the north were not ready or good partners. So, we had to pivot. And I think is the model, is the way the business model has evolved for those agribusinesses, and the way that it is, it's become part of their DNA now for many of them. Yes. And it's quite different from where they were at the beginning in terms of how they, at the very beginning, you had a lot of these businesses would simply just go buy, see what they could buy, and that was it. So it's come a very long way.
So I think those are all of our questions. Richard, over to you.
Yeah, so thanks. This is the second end of project session that I've been closely involved in the last couple of weeks. And the biggest pain last week was to think that you're sort of closing down after 6 or 7 years of blood, sweat and tears from dozens and dozens of people. Very few of them perhaps all the way through, Mark being an exception. I think we have Nana on the call as well, who's the author of the original business case, who I hope is sitting there feeling, really proud of what she started. And I hope all of you at Nathan are also feeling very proud of everything that you've achieved as well. But despite all of those sort of efforts, and we can't sort of thank everybody and see every single result of the project over the last 6 or 7 years. But just keep thinking of those 120,000 farmers who are doing something really quite fundamentally different and beneficial as a result, not of being given seeds or being told what to do, but of having opportunities revealed to them to engage with businesses, to engage with markets in different ways. So although my voice won't carry that far, my thanks to all of those businesses and to the farmers who work with them in northern Ghana and made the Maid project success it has been. Our hopes are all raised for the follow-on project for the ATG, the Agricultural Transformation Project in Ghana, which will learn a fair few fundamental lessons from Maid, a national scope, trying again perhaps to engage those southern businesses and those supply chains across the country, and taking on a sort of a stronger grip of these bigger questions around climate and the way that the Ghanaian economy overall is working. Anyway, thank you also to all of those who joined for the last 90 minutes. And particular thanks to Lucy Kelleher as well, whose name has not come up in lights, but is thoroughly deserving of some thanks and appreciation for making the last 6 or 9 months of this project work so well. All the SROs on the call that have been listening in, former people who've worked on the project. But I think I shall leave it there for now. And thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. And as mentioned, this has been recorded. We'll put it on the website